Now, just a wee bit of introduction to what this presentation is. This is a presentation that I've probably given for, I don't know, maybe 10 years in a row at various boat shows, in particular the Seattle Boat Show. It's a pretty basic docking seminar in the context of at least at the beginning of it. It kind of just reviews things to think about when you're getting ready to dock, and information and kind of setup of the boat. I would say that the primary, maybe the most useful information is at the end, where we're talking about some particular maneuvers to handle, shall we say, tricky situations. So with that, let me dive in here. So I kind of call it a docking process, and I would say that the first part of this is a little bit of planning. And I'm going to make the assumption here, or at least at the start of this, that I'm referring to pulling into, in particular, maybe harbors that you've not been in before. And obviously, pulling into your own harbor, a lot of this initial planning and stuff is really kind of a moot point. But if you're going, if you're heading from here to Alaska, you're going to pull into an awful lot of harbors you don't know. So a lot of this then becomes pertinent. So, study the charts a little bit, take a look and see if there's hazards and depths. Read the cruising guides. A lot of times, especially Wagner's, as you probably all know, has a real nice little diagram of the docks for all of the marinas in the local area. And assign your crew to their appropriate tasks, and then call in on the radio and get your slip assignment. A little bit of preparation then, because once you got your slip assignment, you know whether you're a bow tie, a port tie, or a starboard tie, so you can set up your lines and your fenders, get your crew ready. And then, of course, the trick of finding the slip and getting yourself aligned for a docking at it. And of course, maintaining a appropriate amount of speed for the vessel you're on, and the conditions you're in, of course. One of the things that we see a fair amount of is people mishandling lines. As most of you are aware, being boat owners, that the bow line is not a good friend when you're docking. But first, get the boat stopped, get it held in position, secure the remaining lines, power cord, get that hooked up. And of course, communications are key here. One of the things that we see a fair amount of when we're teaching students is that you'll have a student on the bow watching for traffic, and they'll point at something and talk to the thing that they're pointing at. And of course, the people that they're talking to, reply back and say, "Yep, we hear you really well, but I don't think your skipper can." So it's always a good thing to instruct people to turn around and talk to the skipper. Make eye contact with them when they're trying to talk to them. And of course, we'll add a little practice at the end of this. So that, very basic, just get yourself set up and get ready for the docking. One of the things we'll talk a little bit about here, line and fenders. If you're on a sailboat, I like to take my bow line and string it back so that the bitter end is hanging off the lifeline back towards the shrouds, because if you just hang it over right up at the bow cleat, it is almost impossible to reach if the bow has blown off the dock at all. So you got a much better chance of being able to reach it if it's pulled back to a wider part of the boat. You can see that in this original picture I took 10 years ago, I was using this idea of kind of stringing it up and down over the lifeline. I don't do that anymore because I found that it's too risky to have some of the weight or a little wake come by and knock the bow line off the boat and into the water, and too much chance of it getting in the prop. So currently what I'll do is I'll flip it over at the front of the boat near the cleat, and then just lay it on inside the lifelines all the way back to the shrouds, and then just flip the bitter end over so that there's virtually no chance of the line going overboard. This one on know how to hook a cleat or a bull rail. refers to the concept of being able to use the one of your lines as a brake to hold the boat in place. You know, if the skipper is pulling in and reverse doesn't work, and you can then just tighten up the line. And what I usually mean by this is just hook the line around the cleat or through the bow rail, but don't put a knot on it. Just basically have it go around once, and then you can let the line slide so that you're not actually affecting the boat unless you choose to cinch up on it. Are the fenders at the correct level? Have a roving fender. Excellent job for teenagers or you know, I'd say anyone from about 10 years up is usually pretty good at dropping the fender in between what the boat might hit and your boat. And of course, secure the boat with your standard bow line, stern line, and 2 spring lines. The other thing is if you're in a finger pier where you might have a boat next to you that you per se don't trust their docking skills. On the left-hand side, there were 2 sailboats right across from my boat, and the one owner on the right there had put his fenders down at the water, and I just took a picture across at the 2 boats, and then chopped the picture so that I moved the boats real close to each other, and you can see that if those fenders really are not going to stop those boats from hitting each other up at the tow rail level. But if that owner, I happen to know that owner, so I went over to his boat and raised those 3 fenders back up to the level where they should have been at, and you can see that now the boat is protected from the boat next to it. So on those offside fenders, don't put them down where you're normally used to for docking.
Good idea.
Same thing is true actually if you're rafting. You're going to want those fenders up at the tow rail level. And on power boats, it may or may not be at the tow rail level. You could be up, you know, pretty high. You're going to have to more or less just look over at the boat next to you and put the fenders at the level that is the widest spot on that boat so that you can protect your boat. All right, common errors that we see when docking. Probably the most common is missing fenders or the fenders at the wrong height. Especially if you're pulling into Friday Harbor, those docks are really low, and so you have to have the fenders literally down onto the water. Missing lines is really common. You'll see people pull in and they'll have a stern line on and no bow line, and it just sometimes gets kind of comical. Poor boat handling, going too slow or too fast. In the charter business, probably the most common mistake we see is people trying to just, you know, they're being really cautious and they're going so slow that they don't have any control of their boat. And a sailboat, I think an appropriate docking speed is something probably more than 1 knot, but less than 2 knots is reasonable for pulling into a slip. It gives you much better control of the boat. And of course, that's going to vary a little bit depending on conditions. The stronger the wind is blowing, the faster you're going to have to come in. And you can get away with a little slower. The other thing to remember about going slow is that if you're going to turn a sailboat or any boat for that matter into a slip, if you do it really slowly, it's going to tend to make a wider turn. It's going to take longer for it to turn, and therefore it's going to go further in the direction it was going. So it's going to make for a wider turn. Another common mistake we see are people not understanding and making use of prop wash and or prop walk. And does anyone, I'm going to ask this, it's going to be a little difficult to see, but does anyone not know what prop walk and prop walk are? Do they want me to explain them?
Might be a good idea.
Okay, I can just run through them real quick. The prop wash comes into play when you put your in on most boats, not all boats, but most boats, the rudder is behind the propeller. So when your engine is in forward, the water being pushed towards the aft by the propeller goes across the rudder. And so if you turn that rudder to one side or the other and give the engine a little goose, you're going to create a blast of water that's going to flow down and hit that rudder. And if the rudder's turned one way or the other, it's going to tend to kick your stern to the opposite side from where the rudder is. And the nice thing about prop wash is that it can be used to kick the boat, the stern of the boat, either direction, which is handy. Now there's a couple of caveats around this. One is some of the newer sailboats are coming with dual rudders, but single engine. And so you lose this prop wash because the wash off of the propeller now flows right between the rudders, and it doesn't do any good. So I'm personally, I mean, they're great for sailing and racing, having those twin rudders, but they don't really enhance your ability to handle the boat. Now, prop walk takes into account the tendency for the propeller to sort of act like a paddle wheel and pull the boat to one side or the other. And this effect does happen both in forward and reverse, but in forward, it is so overpowered by the prop wash going across the rudder that you don't feel it. But in reverse, you can, on some boats in particular, you distinctly can feel the stern of the boat being pulled to one side or the other. I used to say that most sailboats had port prop walk and most power boats have starboard prop walk, assuming single engine boats. Dual engine boats don't tend to have it if you put them both in reverse because the engines are counter rotating, so they counteract each other. But with the new advent of the sail drives on the sailboats, I don't think I have seen a sail drive yet that has port prop walk. So the boats in our fleet are about half sail drives, and about half of them now have starboard prop walk, and the other half have port prop walk. So it's kind of a mixed bag. So if you get on a boat you're unfamiliar with, one of the best questions or first questions to ask is which direction does it have prop walk? One other bit of information about prop walk: the more angled the shaft, the more prop walk you tend to get. So sail drives, because the propeller is perfectly perpendicular to the surface of the water, have some prop walk, but it's pretty minimal. And if you get on like a Catalina 42 or a Catalina 36, Catalina has a kind of a habit of putting their engines at a fairly steep angle, so their shaft angle points down into the waterways, and they tend to be very heavy on prop walk. So that's the kind of a very beginning primer on those two things. Now the purpose of the prop wash then is if you get into a dock and your stern is off the dock a little, you can flip your rudder over away from the dock, just give the engine a little oomph, and it'll kick your stern into the dock without really moving the boat forward very much. If you're using prop walk, and if you're docking on the side where your prop walk tends to pull the stern, just putting it in reverse to bring it to a stop will tend to pull the stern of the boat into the dock for you, which is quite handy. On the other hand, if you're docking on the other side of the boat and you tend to put it in reverse, it'll tend to pull your stern off the dock, which can be very frustrating. A hint on overcoming that is change your timing just a little bit. Don't put it in reverse until you have cut your wheel hard to move the stern towards the dock and feel the stern starting to move towards the dock. And that momentum of the boat moving that direction will tend to overpower the prop walk, so that you don't tend to be pulled off the dock like it would normally do. Any questions on that long-winded explanation of those two items? No? Okay. Improper line handling at the dock. Probably the most common thing we see there, is somebody grabbing the bow line and pulling on it.
I just have a question.
Probably, I know a lot of people that literally just don't let people handle their bow line. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to come into a dock even if the wind's trying to blow you off and not have to use the bow line. So
can you hear me, Mike?
Get to that here in just a minute.
Mm-hmm. I think Gene had a question.
All right, so then the next most common mistake I see people make is misjudging the wind or the current. Wind under 10 knots generally has almost no impact. As you get up towards 15, it starts becoming pretty noticeable, and you get anything over 20 and it becomes dramatically noticeable. Probably the most important thing to remember about the wind is that if you have a 10 mile an hour wind, that a 20 mile an hour wind is 4 times more powerful, has 4 times the impact. And if you go to a 30 mile an hour wind, it's 9 times more powerful than a 10 knot wind. So you take the multiple of the increase, so 10 to a 30 is 3, and you square it to get the amount of impact that the wind has. So as the winds get stronger, they have a much higher impact on your boat. Okay, so, all right, why? Okay, and then my last comment here is not knowing when to quit. And what happens here is that somebody will realize that they've made a mistake, and they misjudge the turn, and they're coming close to a boat next to them, and they decide to give it a lot of power and try and get out of it. And the important thing to understand, or to have some knowledge of, and I don't know any good way to do this other than knowing your boat a little bit, is that if you realize that you've lost and you just do whatever you have to bring the boat to a stop, which usually around the docks can happen pretty quickly, then a boat drifting into another boat or a boat drifting into a dock almost never does any significant damage. Whereas if you throw on the power and try and muscle your way out of it, you're highly likely to just put a big stripe down your boat or the boat that you're next to or whatever. So it kind of knowing when to just, bring it to a stop, fend off, then figure out what to do is a very good skill to have. All right, so let's talk a little about maneuvering skills themselves. The awareness of speed and controlling it is probably one of the most important things that you can have is having the appropriate amount of speed. As we talked about earlier, prop walk and prop wash, understanding how to use them and when they come into play. Knowing where your rudder is. Now, almost all the boats with autopilots, the autopilot will have a rudder position indicator, and probably almost all you power boaters are super used to looking at that, because you can't really, it takes 5 turns to get from one side to the other, and so you have no real way of knowing where you're at. On sailboats, where our wheel doesn't really even go around, about 1.5 turns, we can just put some string on the wheel and know when we're centered. But having an idea where your rudder is can be really important. And I'll give you an example. If you're backing a sailboat into a slip and you've turned the rudder, towards the dock to move the stern over just in the last little bit, and then you go and throw the engine in forward to bring the boat to a stop, the prop wash is going to kick that rudder and move the stern right off the dock and just completely undo the docking you just did. So when you're backing into a slip, it's important to remember before you put it in forward to to bring the boat to a stop to center the rudder so that you don't have any prop wash kicking your stern around. But I find that it's just overall a really good thing to just sort of mentally know, all right, here's where my rudder is now, so that you know what's going to happen when you apply power. Knowing when to use power, as probably most of you know, if you turn a boat by it's kind of like pushing a shopping cart backwards. If you're going to turn the boat, you can't swing the bow. You have to swing the stern to get the bow pointed where you want it to go. And if you add a little extra power, it moves that stern around faster, and it actually enhances your turn rather than slowing it down, which if you were steering by moving the bow, adding power would do. So it's a little counterintuitive, but again, a useful skill to have. If you've got bow or stern thrusters, knowing how to use them and when to use them is appropriate. Being good at backing your boat is important.
Not on my boat.
And again, being aware of wind and current. And then, of course, practice all of this to become proficient at it. Okay, so now we've kind of gotten to the meat of the discussion here. These are some of these, a little bit of a maneuvering tip. Now, this particular maneuvering tip, the presentation I have here is designed for sailboats. I have a version of this that has these maneuvering tips for the different power boats, and I'm perfectly happy to kind of run through those quickly. Can somebody just give me a flavor of about how many of you are in powerboats and how many are sailboats? Anybody know there?
Mike, I think that we're probably, who's on here tonight, out of 25, there's probably less than 2 that are powerboaters.
Just say that once more. My volume got turned down again.
I think you only have 1 or 2 possible powerboaters.
Got it. Okay, thank you. So we'll talk primarily right now the sailboats. Going too slow is a problem, as I had indicated earlier. If you go too slow, you're going to tend to make your turns wider. So, and I actually, when I docked the boat day before yesterday, I don't normally kind of look down at the knot meter. And I realized that I was docking the boat at 2 knots, and it felt comfortable to me. So I'm gonna revise this slide in the future and probably put it from like 1 to 2 knots is probably an appropriate speed for sailboats. Slower than that, and they're just not going to turn very quickly. Most of the time, you're going to dock a sailboat in neutral. In other words, you're going to come down the aisleway, and when you get 3 or 4 slips away from where you're docking, put it in neutral, unless your boat idles really fast. Again, in power boats, this is completely different. In power boats, you want to approach the dock in neutral, and have the boat slow down quite a bit right before you're going to make your turn, and then you have to apply power to turn the boat. So handling a sailboat and a power boat are very different in this last little bit of maneuvering right before the dock. And again, short bursts of power can enhance the turning of the spinning of the boat. Okay, so let's talk about some of this is sort of the meat of the subject, a little bit of some tricks that we use a lot. Now, one of them is the situation where, there's just 2 of you, couple coming into the dock, and the wind is blowing across the dock like we indicate here. And on a sailboat, what we recommend doing is taking your midship spring line and having the person who gets off the boat take that line and hook it around the outside cleat, the end cleat on the dock. And you can see the yellow line, which is supposed to represent that spring line, is hooked around that outside cleat. Now, what happens is you can have that person get off the boat wrap that line once around that cleat, and then just stand there and hold it. And as soon as, and what I usually do is we'll have somebody hook that around the cleat, and they'll just let the line slide through their hand until the skipper brings the boat into position and brings it to a stop. But they will tell the skipper, "I've got you hooked." And so then the skipper, as soon as they get the boat in position, can say, "Okay, lock it down." And that person can either just finish a cleat hitch on that cleat, or they can just stand there and hold it. And the skipper's going to put the boat back into forward. And what's going to happen when they do that is that the line's going to keep the boat from going anywhere. It's not going to move, but you've got the forward thrust from the engine trying to move the boat forward, and it's going to pull on the port side of the boat in this diagram and tend to twist the bow into the dock. And so you'll notice that I've got the rudder in this particular case turned away from the dock so that the prop wash tends to push the stern into the dock. And in doing this, you can basically just hold the boat right up against the dock with the wind blowing fairly hard and not have the boat go anywhere. And then you can either, if you've tied a cleat hitch on that spring line, the person that tied that can go and tie the bow line, the other midship line, the stern line, and get everything else tied down, and then put the boat in neutral. And it works quite well. And if you're doing this with a power boat, you can use your stern line usually, because that you normally are getting off a power boat at the stern. So a stern line works fairly well. It doesn't work as well on sailboats in a stronger wind because you don't have as much power in the engine, and the boat's not as wide generally. In a lighter wind, using a stern line on a sailboat works fine. On a power boat, do be aware that if we've got some places where we've got like a 42-foot power boat pulling into a 40-foot slip. Obviously, in that case, they can't use a stern line because their stern line is sticking outside the end of the dock. So you have to use a midship line in that case. Now, one other comment about this particular maneuver: it works really well. It also can work to get you off the dock in this same kind of condition. You can put the boat in forward, undo all the dock lines except that one spring line, have the skipper standing there with it in idle forward, and then put it in neutral. The person at the dock just very quickly unhooks the line from that cleat, hops on at the gate, and then put the engine in reverse and slide right out. And you can do it very quickly, and you don't have to worry about trying to undo a bow line and have the wind blowing the bow into the boat next door and so forth. So this maneuver works in both directions. Some boats, and probably maybe 50% of them, the midship cleat is too far forward, and it tends to cause the boat to twist in towards have the bow twist in a little too hard. If that happens on your boat, try just moving the position where that line is towards the aft on your boat. If you've got your jib cleats, your jib winches are forward in your cockpit, just put the loop of your dock line over the winch and do this docking maneuver with it over the winch. The winch is plenty strong of a point on the boat to dock to and hold this force. If you've got a tow rail like I do on my boat that is aluminum and has holes in that aluminum tow rail, I use a big carabiner and move the line back to one of the spots on the tow rail, and I almost have sort of an infinite adjustment, and I know exactly where to hook it at just by playing with it, to where I can control the angle of the boat by just moving the rudder back and forth with the engine in forward, but boat not moving. So, any questions on this one before I roll forward at all? All right, so trying to leave a dock with the wind trying to hold you on, and this is basically a classic bow spring maneuver. So the trick to this is to put a fender right up almost on the bow, maybe a foot back from where the bow is, hang it on your bow pulpit, and take a spring line to a cleat on the dock that is maybe a third of the way back the boat, and then just hook it around the cleat and hand it back up to a person standing on the bow. Since the wind's holding you on, you probably can now undo all of the other lines on the dock, and your boat's not going to move because the wind's pushing you on. So then the skipper gets back on the boat, turns the wheel and the rudder hard towards the dock, and then puts the engine in forward. And the forward motion or the forward propulsion is going to tend to twist the boat out, partially because the bow's being pulled on, and partially because the prop wash from the turned rudder is going to swing the boat out. And it's really easy to get a boat swung literally to the kind of position I show here, about 45 degrees off the dock. And then straighten your, I actually suggest as soon as, what you want to do is get the boat moving off the dock against the wind so that you've got some momentum against the wind going. And then as soon as you get to an angle where you're comfortable, throw it in reverse with some alacrity. You want to actually suck the boat off the dock fairly quickly, and as you're doing that, straighten your wheel. You can then back up a ways, and I would suggest seeing if you can get the bow to start swinging into the wind while you're backing up, but you may not be able to. Then cut your rudder hard over the other way and goose the engine good and hard to get the boat to swing around into the wind, and go ahead and leave the dock this way. This maneuver works really well, and it takes a touch of practice. But so any questions on this one before we mosey forward? All right. So
I had a question, Mike. Sorry,
Yeah.
I had to
Go ahead.
figure out my microphone. I think you mentioned when we talked this morning that on your website there are a number of articles. Is one of those about docking as well?
Yes, there's several of them about docking.
Okay,
there.
so we'll find some of those things we can find basically in those articles too.
Yeah, most of this stuff is talked about in there. Not all of it, but a healthy chunk of it. And I'll show you how to get to that at the end of the talk here.
Great, thank you.
Mike, can I ask a question?
Yes.
On that diagram, it's not showing that you're next to another boat.
This is a linear dock, not
okay.
this does not work in a finger slip.
Okay.
You're on the customs dock with a big power boat in front of you and behind you, and the wind's blowing you onto the dock. How do you get off?
Right. Okay. Thank you. I'm so sorry.
That's a good question. Yeah, no, this wouldn't work in a finger slip, but you don't have that much trouble. You can literally walk a boat back out of a finger slip against the wind generally. But all right. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Turning against prop walk. So we had one of the owners in our fleet had a Catalina 36. Not in the fleet anymore, so I can probably get away with telling this story. And the Catalina 36 had really strong prop walk to port, and his boat was in a position like this, and he needed to turn and go the way this boat is shown coming out of its slip. And he put it in reverse at an idle, and he turned the rudder hard over to starboard to try and back his boat out, and the boat basically just went straight backwards. And he kind of scratched his head, and he straightened his wheel up and put it back and forward, pulled back into a slip. And he did this 3 times. And he managed to get the boat turned about 5 degrees, so that when he put it back into forward the last time, his bow came right up against his finger pier. Fortunately, there was a person standing there who had been kind of watching this and said, yeah, just bring it up here and I'll push you out. So that he brought his bow pulpit up, and the person gave it a good hard shove and got him off the dock. So, the question is, how could he have gotten off that dock without that help? And the trick to this is to cut your wheel hard over to starboard, put the boat in reverse, and goose the engine a little. Don't do it instantly. Make sure you get it in reverse and the boat starts to move. You make sure your lines are all off and you've kind of cleared everything, and then just give the engine a good roar, and then put it in neutral. And so basically you're getting the boat moving backwards, and then when you put it in neutral, instantly the prop walk goes away and the rudder can dig in and help let the boat go ahead and turn. And if you didn't get it going fast enough, just stick it back in reverse and do that once more. Just to put it back into neutral. And then the boat will act just very normally and kind of back around very nicely. So that's the trick to turning against prop walk, is just eliminate the prop walk by going into neutral. All right, so now this is a maneuver here that I cooked up. I've never seen it written up anywhere, and I use it only because I found it worked fairly well for my students. And it's a situation of you're pulling into a slip, just doing what I would classify as sort of a normal docking around here. And it's difficult to judge when are you going to start your turn. If you turn a little too late, you end up smacking the finger pier, as I've got in my dashed line here. And if you start turning too soon, you tend to take the stern off the boat next to you. So how do you get yourself into position so that you can make this docking pretty reliably? And so what I suggest to my students is to break the turn into two pieces. I have them start the turn when their bow gets to the finger pier before the one that they're docking at, and then I have them aim the boat at the end of the finger pier that they're docking at, and then when they get about half a boat length from that finger pier, initiate the second half of the turn. And the reason I do this is this. You can see that if I start my turn early or if I start my turn late, that the bow of my boat ends up inside that white circle. And that is a much smaller place and fairly easy to then adjust what I'm going to do. If I've overshot it a little and I'm on the left-hand side of that white circle, I'm going to tend to just aim straight into the dock. And it's much easier to judge this because my boat's now quite close to the dock. And if I've turned a little early and I'm over on the right-hand side of that white circle, then I'm going to aim on like maybe 2/3 of the way down the dock, allow the bow to come into the dock further, and then do a little bit of a last turn right at the end. So this methodology works pretty well in the only place where it really doesn't work very well is if you've got a real narrow aisleway, in which case there just really isn't kind of time to do the straighten and then turn again. You almost have to just do it in a constant turn. So any questions on this sort of general concept? No? All right, parallel parking. This works on sailboats. Don't try it in a powerboat. And the idea here is you're pulling in again to a linear dock. It's a customs dock, and there's a 50-foot powerboat in one spot, and then 50 feet up the dock is the end of another 50-foot powerboat, and you want to put your 40-foot boat into that 50 feet of space in between those two boats. How do you get it in there? So the parallel parking, or what is commonly called the slide stop, and how many of you have seen Captain Ron? And if you remember in Captain Ron, there's the scene where there's the black tie party on the dock, and he comes pulling the boat in, and they all think he's going to crash into the dock, and they start panicking. The maneuver that he does in that film is a slide stop. It's this same maneuver. And the trick to it is to come into the dock perpendicular to the dock, like I show the boat here, and aim your bow where you want your stern to end up. So I'm going to, and you're going to have to turn in the direction where your prop walk helps the turn. So I'm going to do this turn with port prop walk. And so I'm turning to starboard. And you're going to aim at the dock and motor in until you get about half a boat length from the dock. Speed varies a little bit. On my 43-foot boat, I come into this maneuver at 2 knots, and I want to have 2 knots on when I get that half boat length from the dock. If I'm on a 34-foot boat, I'm probably only going to need about 1 knot of speed. So you want to practice this in a place where you can get a feel for the boat that you've got without having to be right at a dock. And so kind of doing it off the end of the dock and just pretending that the dock extends out is a good way of doing that. But here's the maneuver. You pull into the dock until you're half a boat length from it, cut the wheel hard to starboard, count to 1, put it in reverse at an idle. If you've got, and it depends on the if you're on a boat with a that reverses well, reverse at an idle is all you need. I've got a max prop that flips over and reverses very well. If you've got a folding propeller, then you're probably going to want to speed up your RPMs and slightly above an idle, maybe into 800, 900 kind of range, but not dramatically. And when your boat gets to about 45 degrees, as I show the dashed boat here, then you're going to start undoing the turn on your wheel. Not quickly. The idea is to sort of judge how fast the boat's turning, because as you unturn the wheel and straighten the wheel, what you're doing is straightening the rudder and causing the rudder to become a brake to the turn. And when you do that, the boat tends to just slide, has a little bit of forward momentum still, and it slides sideways right into the dock. And it's one of those maneuvers where when you first do it, it puts your heart in your throat. When you get used to it, it works super well. So again, a really good thing to practice, like off the end of a finger pier in open water, and just pretend that dock sticks out into the water another 40 feet. And if you can get the boat so that it ends up parallel to that pretend line and just slightly slides over that dock at a slow enough speed that your fenders would just stop your momentum, then you've gotten the maneuver down perfectly. Now, I suspect there's some questions on this one. Yes? No?
Yes.
Okay.
Dave, what about wind?
Okay. Now, in wind in this, it has some, if the wind is trying to blow you off the dock,
Yeah.
then I would probably not use this maneuver. And I will show you. I'll show you.
I'm sorry,
I'll
my
show
husband.
I'll show you another. The next maneuver I'm going to show you is how to do that one. It depends. I mean, if the wind's blowing at under 10 knots, then I generally, I'm not going to worry about it.
Right.
Do understand that if the wind is blowing in this particular docking from the left-hand side, if it's blowing towards your starboard side, that it's going to enhance the turning of the boat. And so I might wait slightly longer before I start my turn. And if I'm doing it with the wind blowing from the right-hand side, where I'm going to have to turn my bow into the wind, then I might start my turn slightly sooner. And by slightly, I mean, maybe 4 or 5 feet, not dramatically. Just because it may take me slightly longer to get the bow to swing around. So the wind doesn't have dramatic impacts on this unless it's literally just trying to blow you off the dock. So any other questions on this? All right. Now, the situation where the wind is trying to literally, you've got a 30-knot wind blowing across the dock that you're trying to come into. Your classic mad scramble to try and get the boat to the dock. So the trick to this one is make the wind your friend. So if you pull your boat up to this dock, just beside it, and just bring the boat to a stop, what's going to happen? Your bow's going to swing downwind, right? Because your bow's going to go before the rest of the boat does. So let it happen. And then just start backing up towards the dock. And in a strong wind, you're probably going, if you put it in idle at reverse, you're probably going to just sit there. You may actually have to speed up a little in order to get the boat to move against a strong wind. So you can literally inch your way back towards this dock in a very calm manner. And if you go back and have someone on the back of the boat with a spring line and have them just step off the back of the boat, put that spring line around a cleat, and then put the boat in forward and turn your rudder initially towards the dock to kick your stern off. And then as you swing the boat around, it's going to, you're going to need to turn the rudder over to the other side. Otherwise, you'll tend to just rotate the boat right around and swing your bow into the dock and not bring the boat in parallel. So you'll have to swing the rudder over. And the idea is as soon as you get to about 45 degrees towards the dock, then start trying to control with your rudder your boat movement so that the boat movement is literally coming in parallel to the dock. But it's a really no muss, no fuss way of coming in and landing on a dock where the wind's trying to blow you off. Now you can do this with a stern line on a power boat. If the wind's not blowing super hard, you can do it with a stern line on a sailboat. Might take a little more power to get the bow to swing around, but it's doable. Any questions on that one? No. Okay, so if anyone is interested, some of the resources that we have, and I'm not promoting these, I'm just letting you know about them. We do teach a docking clinic where we have people get on one of our 40-foot sailboats, and we go out and spend all weekend never leaving the harbor and just practicing all of these maneuvers. It's a great class in really getting yourself comfortable and feeling a lot better around maneuvering in and around the docks. Now, also down at the bottom, you see our website, and let me change here for just a second over to our website. On our website, there is this about. Can you guys see the website now? Okay. Yep. Good. Under about, there's this option for resources, and under that resources, these are a whole list of reprinted articles that I wrote for 48 North back in about 2010 to 12, where I was doing that sailing tips column every month. And so there's, here's the article on the slide stop where it talks through that. So, and about how to practice it on a finger pier where you can learn what it takes on your boat to do it appropriately. So these articles are all available to you and out there for anyone who wants to read. So feel free to make use of that. I'm trying to get so that I can close that. So anyway, that's the end of that presentation. Thank you guys for being patient and putting up with me for going through it here.
Yeah, thank you, Mike.
Do you offer?
That was great. Clap, clap,
Can
clap.
I ask a question? Do you offer like weekend classes for women that want to learn from you versus their husband?
Yeah.
This is Leslie.
Hi, Leslie.
We do a fair amount of that, actually. We consider ourselves very practiced at saving marriages.
Yeah.
Oh, that would be it right there. Okay.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Absolutely. We actually have a couple of women that teach this docking clinic, and if you call us up and just say, hey, I'd rather learn from a woman, let us know, and we'll try and make that happen. It's
Okay.
very doable. Although, quite honestly, I don't know if all of our instructors are really good at this, and I don't think you'd have too much trouble with any of them.
Great. That's what I wanted to hear.
Great.
Anybody else? Well, it's nice to see you guys have such it looks like you got a pretty good attendance tonight. That was very cool. Okay, just a second. Let me, there we go.
Oh, there we
Here we are. Here's everybody.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank
Hey,
you,
you're
Mike.
welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
That's
Mike, and I
wonderful.
hope you're not going too crazy with this, having a new business in this time of year.
It's a little interesting right now, but we are starting to open for charters here with phase 2, so we've got our fingers crossed. So